Donna Schwartz here from the Everything Saxophone podcast. I'm so happy, so honored to have Heidi Radtke here. She does it all. She's an incredible classical player. She has a new album out called Convergence, and there's so much great stuff in this album. If you're not into classical music, trust me, listen to this one, you will be. So Heidi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so your publicist contacted me. She told me about the new album, so I was listening to it, and man, there's so much good stuff in there. I want to definitely dive into that, but I want people to get to know you if they don't know you already. I know that you are teaching at the University of North Carolina, but you've been in a lot of places. You've studied with some amazing, incredible people throughout your life. And in reading on your website, on the homepage, you talked about how even at 5 years old, you knew you wanted to play the saxophone and you patiently waited. So can you talk a little bit about your background and, dive into that story a little bit more?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm originally from Michigan. I grew up in Albion, Michigan, um, which is, sort of in the middle of saxophone land. I was surrounded by great saxophonists, even though at the time when I was young, I didn't know it. Um, and I just the memory I have of the saxophone was just, yeah, with my family. We were in Chicago's Union Station. It was around holiday season, and there was a busker playing the saxophone, and my mom was trying to drag me away, and I wouldn't budge. I was just transfixed by this instrument. And my family isn't overtly musical. My parents were active like in high school. My mom actually played the saxophone. My mom was a saxophonist and she played in middle school and high school. And so the family had a saxophone. And that's what I actually ended up starting on. But I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know that we had a saxophone in the family. I just saw this instrument and wanted to play it. And my older sister, was in the band in school and she played oboe. And so it was just sort of when it was my turn to pick an instrument when I got into sixth grade, I was just waiting and waiting to play the saxophone. And at that time, it's so funny. I yell at my parents for this. At that time, my mom's like, well, we can get my old saxophone out and get it fixed up. I was like, we had one this whole time. And so I had this old Vito. I still have it. And that's what I started on, wooden case that I carried to school. And just, yeah. So I started playing in sixth grade, started taking some lessons and never wanted to stop. Yeah.
That's cool. That's a cool story. And I'm curious, did your mom help you at all since she had experience, or did she just hands off?
She was pretty shy about it, but like she knew what she was doing. Like we got the saxophone out, and I might have actually started on just a rental, and while they were fixing up the saxophone that we owned, because it was not in playing condition. It had been like in a barn for like 30 years. So,
Okay.
yeah, and but she knew exactly how to put it together. So she helped me put the saxophone together, and I made some sounds, but then immediately she got me into private lessons. Like she just wanted me to have instruction from that end. Um, but supportive, yes. She's just always been, my parents have been just completely supportive. They would, I was up there practicing in the second floor where everybody in the neighborhood could hear me every day. And,
That's cool.
never once asked me to stop, always just encouraged me to practice and play and all those things. So I'm lucky on that, in that front, to have such supportive parents.
Yeah, and what's really cool is that your mom played. That's so important, like for women especially, because they're how often do you have that kind of role model? It's usually the dad,
Yeah.
or an uncle
Yeah.
or something like that.
It never even crossed my mind. Like, and I could see where, some parents might be hesitant or, to, have their daughter play a saxophone, and mine were like, we have one, my mom played, so it was fine. It was always just not a big deal. So
Cool. And the greatest thing that she did, and it doesn't matter the age, because a lot of people that listen to this podcast are, in their 50s and their 60s, and some of them just started playing again or
Mm.
just started playing. And the most important thing that I always say is get good instruction right away,
Yeah.
because you don't want to start with like, confusion or anything like that. You want a solid foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I think the next time I put the saxophone together, it was in a lesson. Like we got it out and we put it together, and my mom immediately, she's like, I'm signing, because she knew how much I wanted to play. And so um knowing from her experience how much value that would bring, she just they got me in right away. That was really sweet. So
And let me ask you, since the age of 5, so you saw that busker. Okay, awesome.
yeah.
Um, were you seeking out like recordings and stuff like that? Were you listening to any saxophone players, or it just was kind of like in the back of your mind or something?
Sort of in the back of my mind. I mean, we'd hear them on the radio, if there's ever a song that had saxophone in it, and uh, my parents, if they saw an album with a saxophone on it, I would get it, and that meant many different things. Sometimes it was like they would listen to a lot of light classical, like pop's classical
Got it.
music albums. And so we would have that. And if there's saxophone on that, we would listen to it. I got plenty of Kenny G albums when I was little. Listen to that. And I credit the guy because I wanted to play this. It was just it got me excited about playing. And I think, um, I this is funny. I haven't even thought about this memory in a long time, but there was, if you ever went to like zoos, when you were little, they would have these recordings where it would be like ambient or jazz or something with animal sounds in the background. And there was this album called JazzLoon, and it had the sounds of like loon birds like in the background with like jazz. Um, and I listened to that album so much. So I don't know if that explains anything about my playing, but that was a heavy influence. I don't know the saxophonists that were on it, but I should look it up because JazzLoon, that's where we were. So
Okay, this is interesting too, and this is going to lead, very soon when we talk about Convergence, your album, and just some of the like sound effects and the extended techniques and and all that kind of thing. That's really
hmm.
interesting. I wonder if that was in the back of your mind.
I think everything was on the table when I started playing the saxophone. Like all sounds were on the table. And it was, there wasn't a specific genre I felt I needed to conform. I mean, it was just, I just wanted to play this instrument, and I had listened to it from so many different sides, being in band, but then listening to, rock music and pop music and classical and like just, yeah, all sorts of things. And one thing that was consistent was the saxophone was a part of all those things. And so just so many different genres that the saxophone was at home in. It made me really excited about an instrument because I just thought, wow, I can do so much with it. So
Yeah, that's important. And you know what I'm really curious about? So like some of your early listening experiences were when your family like found albums with saxophones on it or something, something like that.
yeah.
But what do you think, if you could, yeah, I'm sure you'll remember, what was the most influential thing, album, song, artist that you listened to that really affected you? That really, changed your outlook when it came to saxophone. I'm talking when you were younger.
Yeah. Well, I have two really different experiences. Um, my sister was older, and she did the all-state program at Interlochen. So we were in the state of Michigan, and that's when the University of Michigan had a camp at Interlochen Arts Camp during the summer. It's like a 2-week thing. And she did it one summer. She went there, and we went up for the final band concert that they had. And Donald Cinta was played a concerto piece with the ensemble, and it was this piece called "As You Like It." And it was a piece for saxophone and band, but um, the saxophone did many different types of traditions. So it played in a classical style, and of course, Don Cinta could do all those things, and so he was just bringing in different saxophone, like playing traditions and woven into this piece. But I just remember his sound impacted me immediately when I heard that. And I think when you're so young, you're so impressionable. Like you grab onto that, you grab onto the sound concept and the vibrato. And I remembered that was right before I had started playing. Like it was before I was old enough to start playing. And so like that was around the same time that I was gearing up to doing that. And so that was sort of in my ear when we were doing that. And so that sound was there. And then I got into John Coltrane. And I got the album Blue Train, and I got it from the library, and I, like recorded it on a cassette tape, and I listened to that thing on repeat all the time. Like I just if it was with me all the time. So I just listened to Don Cinta, and then Blue Train were like my two big influences when I was just sort of developing and listening. So
That's so cool. And was that piece that Donald sent to play, was that on alto?
yes.
So
Yeah.
interesting. One on alto and one on tenor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting also because, you don't just play alto, you play alto, soprano, and tenor, and
Mm-hmm.
that's evident on your album and stuff like that. So this is so interesting because already I'm seeing this theme of divergent styles, you know? And like again it fitting your album and everything like that. So talk to me. You saw this concert with Donald Cinta, and then you mentioned cassette tapes, so you must be pretty close in age to me because I remember cassette tapes and
Oh
taking
yeah.
things off the radio
Yes.
and all that kind of thing. I still have tons of cassette tapes, but as you're going through whether it was junior high or middle school to high school, what who was your most influential teacher, if anybody, at that point?
So I started going to the All-State program at Interlochen as soon as I could. I played in sixth grade, and then after my sixth grade year, um, I was taking lessons with just a gentleman in town while I was still living in Albion. But then during the summers, I started studying with Timothy McAllister.
Oh,
And so
wow.
he was teaching at the program, and also Donald Cinta was involved in that too. So um I just like hit the jackpot in terms of like role models and instruction.
Yeah.
And that, even though it was just like a few weeks every summer, um I just took everything to heart. And we were given these like warm-up packets, and I remember, I mean, I just remember Timothy McAllister just saying, well, you should probably, be practicing 2 to 3 hours a day. And he's like telling middle school kids that. And I was like, okay. And so I took this packet, and I guess that's what I worked on, And so I just got to work, and then my private teacher would like, supplement that and like support that. But we then moved from Michigan to the northwest suburbs of Chicago before I started high school.
Oh,
And so when I started high school, I started taking lessons from Dave Q. Blank, who is a great saxophonist. And he's actually does classical and jazz. He was a student of Stephen Duke at Northern Illinois University. And then he just gigs and does a lot of playing around Chicago still. And so he just really took me under his wing in high school and taught me everything, as much as I could learn from him. And then I'd still go back to Interlochen over the summers. And
hmm.
um, my senior year of high school, I actually went to the Arts Academy and studied there with Bill Sears, who's like a fantastic jazz player, and him and his wife Lori taught me lessons there. So I think all along the way, up until I got to college, I was taking lessons from people who actually were primarily, except for like over the summers, but my year-round teachers were primarily jazz players.
Hmm.
But interestingly enough, taught me classical. So I didn't get a whole lot of jazz instruction from them. I got mostly classical instruction from them. For, that's a side reason that we won't really dig into. But I it was always just, jazz was always so influential on my sound concept and just like how I heard the saxophone. And I think the expression and the freedom, that's just always been a part of my imagination when it comes to making music. And yeah, so that's pretty much the formative years.
And that makes sense too because you had on autopilot the John Coltrane album, and
Uh-huh.
I'm curious, you must have been a fan of Cannonball Adderley too, and you know
Mm-hmm.
yeah, okay, and maybe even Sonny Stitt and Phil Woods and all that type of thing. So that's really interesting because tonal concept, that's where it starts. It doesn't start from just blowing into the saxophone. It starts from what you're hearing in your head. And
Right.
as one of my famous teachers, Vince Penzarella, said, you have to feed your brain good information, and feeding the good information will affect everything else that comes from that. So that's really awesome that you were able to do that. Now, I'm curious about that packet from Timothy McAllister, like because, and I'm just thinking how someone who's listening to this right now is like, gee, I wonder what's in that packet. So
Long tones, tons of long tones. Yeah, long tones, voicing exercises, just fundamentals, a lot of just fundamentals, sound and tonal development. And I spent a long time on that stuff. And um, people that are familiar with sort of the University of Michigan and a lot of the pedagogy that comes out of there knows that like voicing and overtone work and a lot of that, it plays a strong role. And so I was just doing a lot of that stuff. And but that really taught me a lot about focusing my sound, projection, support, the ability to play in the various registers with control and awareness. It does a lot for building those sort of things. So it gave me a good, and then all the technique stuff, so your scales and articulation and all that. But it was just, yeah, tongue tone technique.
yes,
That's what, yeah.
absolutely. And then let me ask you this question: when did you know that you wanted to become a professional saxophone player?
Oh, like seventh grade.
Okay, that's
like I that's what I was gonna do. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool. I could definitely relate to that for sure. And so, remind me, so where did you go for undergrad?
I went to the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then I know you also have a doctoral degree as well, too. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, you, I guess, kept on studying with really great players, really great teachers, and all that kind of thing. As you're going through college, was your main focus classical, or were you doing both classical and jazz?
Main focus is absolutely classical. I still did in undergrad. I mean, I was studying with Deborah Rickmeyer,
Right.
and then I was in the jazz. I was always in the jazz bands, but I wasn't like heavily. I wasn't like enrolled in jazz lessons. So other than just listening and playing in the bands, that's pretty much all I did. But I was focusing heavily on classical. Yeah, for my undergrad.
And I'm just curious too, did you change your setup when you went from classical to jazz, or did you play with the same setup?
I had some jazz setups that I would play with. So I think I just was, I had a Meyer that I was playing on in jazz band. But yeah, I've definitely, it's actually in more recent years where I've become a lot more aware of um and interested in different setups and what those can do. But yeah, I just for jazz band, I wish I had, looking back, retrospect, I wish I had invested a little bit more in a diverse lesson experience and taken more jazz lessons while I was in undergrad. man, I encourage my students to do that now, and um, because it's just that, the sooner you start, the longer your ears have, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. And do you, well, let me ask this question too, because, with your album again, there's so much technique in there and all that kind of thing. Did you ever do any kind of improvisation at all, like any study it on your own or anything like that?
Just I mean, here and there, I did take some lessons. Let's see. Um, I took jazz improvisation classes while I was an undergrad. So I did some like classroom things. Um, and in terms of and I was always like, especially when I started teaching, um, I started teaching young students, and gosh, I've been teaching for quite a while now. But when I started teaching high school and middle school students, um, I started, reaching out to colleagues. Like I reached out to my colleagues at Butler University, Matt Pivick, just like, and people that I knew, just to grab a lesson here and there and work and go to master classes and really listen so that I could pick up, practice techniques and also develop my teaching in that area. And so then just by playing like really simple improvisation things with students, and then making sure that I was prepared for those lessons, it really kind of opened my mind to working on improvisation and approaching it. And for me, it's always been much easier to approach it from a melodic sense rather than just like playing the line and playing music. So yeah, and actually right now, just teaching alongside Rasan Barber. I'm picking a ton up, and he's encouraged me to improvise, and I improvised a lot quite a bit on the album. That was like really, it was great for me to be at a point in my playing where I could do that and I could express my playing like that. Because I think as a classical player, like I don't know if it's fear or what, but the thought of just like improvising was really kind of almost paralyzing to me for a long time. Like I was really intimidated by it. And it's been really great to throw myself into that direction more and more and more, and then trust my ears and trust that I know the stuff, like I can do this. So yeah.
Yeah, isn't it crazy how, and the reason why I asked, and you kind of answered it too, because I was really curious how much it affected it influenced this new album, but isn't it crazy you were saying that, gosh, it was almost like, paralysis in a certain sense,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about improvising. Isn't it crazy though, the level of playing ability that you have, and yet, like many people don't teach students how to improvise. It's just got to read music, and they're so afraid of teaching it too.
Yeah, it's really to me. I look back and I'm so curious as to why I never asked to not be taught jazz. I never, this was what I was listening to all the time. But I think when you're young, I went into lessons and I was just taught classical, and I didn't question it. I just That's what we worked on, um, and yeah, it's really interesting that it wasn't until I started experimenting in undergrad. I just joined a couple jam bands, and I played like non-school related, just different types of instrumental. I played in like an Afrobeat ensemble, and I played in like a jazz, like jam band sort of session, and I just played, and it was so easy to just, I wasn't worried about changes or anything like that. I was just playing and playing melody and learning tunes and then just like soloing over them. And that's, that's kind of why when I say like I teach from just like let's make a melody, let's learn this melody and then let's use that to build another melody, and um so it's really just like melody and line building, and what are your ears hearing, what sounds good, is that sort of thing. That is really important, to just get your saxophone out and play. Get your horn out and make up a melody. And that activation of the imagination is what allows us to even play written music with direction and thought and idea. Because if you're not creating those sounds in your imagination, and if you're not connecting the dot, by coming up with something that you would sing and then doing it on the saxophone, it's hard to do that in the moment. It's hard to do that when you're reading what someone else is writing, because it just becomes something that you're reading with your eyes and not something that you're hearing in your soul, and that you're admitting. So I think it's just really important to just let's get the saxophone out and let's just create a melody, come up with a simple tune right now, just like create something. And so sometimes when there's a roadblock in a lesson, that's a really fun thing to do, either with myself in a practice session, because sometimes I get in ruts, or with students too, if they're so in their eyes, they're so on the page. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great exercise. And, just like the theme really is just melody, letting the melody inform. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that those experiences with the jam band and also with the West African Beats band, helped with this album. Because again, like I'm listening to, I'm listening to some of these tracks and I'm grooving, there's some good grooves going on there, and um but there's also melody too, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think it's really awesome. So let me ask you this question. So you graduated undergrad, then graduate, you got your doctoral degree, remind me, from
Indiana. Yeah.
Indiana. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Great school. And so then after that, then you started to teach and all that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um when did you start this is your first album, but did you,
Yeah.
do any other like types of performances before then?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when I was in Indianapolis, like performing with like ensembles, or what?
Yeah, I'm just thinking this is your first album, and I'm just thinking like were you on any other records or anything like that before then?
Actually, just it's on an album with the University of Illinois Saxophone Studio. We did like a large saxophone ensemble album, that I was a part of that. Um, but I actually did quite a bit of studio work when I was in Indianapolis. So recording band music actually. So like that, the Hal Leonard Corporation and KJOS, like for one reason or another, they chose Indianapolis as where they would record like all the music that was written for middle school and high school bands that came out with that publisher. And so several times a year, they would have these band sessions, and they would just hire either people from the Indianapolis Symphony, and then in saxophone case, we would, the local people. And so I got to sit in on those sessions, and I was doing that for 7-8 years,
Wow.
just like going in and just reading, and those were always like, that is such a great experience, because you learn how to read, and you learn how to that whole behind the scenes and the recording process. So I was used to being in a studio, and I know, and recording, and that sort of thing, that was um something that wasn't new to me. So that's true.
That probably
But
was incredibly helpful for your album too, because I'm thinking about all the things, those pieces were really hard to play. And yeah, obviously you've worked them out, but it's a different element being in a studio,
mhm.
recording studio, I should say, compared to your whether you recorded at your own home or whatever it may be, because it wasn't just you, right? You had other people,
Mhm.
unless you did track by track. Let's talk about the album since I'm going there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so how did that, let's do it this way. How did that come to pass? What made you decide to create the album?
Great question. Yeah, I've wanted to do one for such a long time. Um, and for me, I think what one was, there's a financial barrier, I think, to creating an album. I mean, there's a lot of capital that has to go into that. And then um, but I think what really kind of hung me up was what to record. So it was like, what do I want to record? And also just to have the time. I was teaching so much when I was in Indianapolis that like I barely had time to like lift my head up to sort of think about that sort of a project. And one of the main reasons I took a shift and a pivot to come out to North Carolina was I needed time to work on my playing. And doing an album was just such a goal of mine that like I really wanted to use this opportunity where I had a little bit more free time to practice and to like concentrate on my professional playing. But yeah, I didn't know what to record, and that's such a that is kind of paralyzing when you're thinking of a first album and trying to make it something, you know, that you feel strong about. It's almost like writing a dissertation. It takes you like the hardest part is finding the topic.
Yeah.
So uh but what ended up happening is I was new on the faculty and new in the region of North Carolina. And I wanted to do a solo recital my first year that I was on the faculty. And I didn't know a whole lot of people. And so I thought, well, why don't I just do a recital with like fixed media and some or unaccompanied pieces? Because then I can just, I can just pick a night that's free and I don't have to worry about lining something up or finding a collaborative artists or just trying to do that. I'll just make it easy. I'll just do something like that. And I think, coming out of, 2020 to 2022, I had a plenty to choose from of pieces that I had worked on that were either for solo saxophone or fixed media. I had just been playing several of those. And so I just sort of like picked some of my favorites as well as some new pieces that I was really excited about. I'd heard Jenny Watson's Arabesque and I wanted to play that. And then I had, some my colleague Frank Felice wrote a piece for me for tenor saxophone and fixed media. And so I had been collecting a few pieces and I had some favorites. Cuckoo was a favorite. I love that piece. And I played a recital and my students loved it. And, I got such good feedback from them. And then I just thought, I'm like, well, I should just record. This should be my album. I think I have it. Like, why don't I just do this? I just performed a recital with most of that music and I was comfortable with it. And I made a few changes to the program and won a faculty grant from the University of North Carolina that allowed me to basically get to the point of mastering that was completely funded. So that was a huge opportunity for me. So I was like, I'm just going to do this, and I went for it there.
That's awesome. Did
Yeah.
did you perform Convergence, or was that a piece that you later added for the album?
I added that for the album. I didn't do that on the recital. That is a piece that I had performed years ago while I was still a doctoral student at Indiana. That I always loved it. Song Mian was with me during the doctoral degree. She is now living in Seoul, Korea. Is just an awesome composer and person. She's the best. But we were good friends and I loved her music and she was working on wanted to do a piece with fixed media. And so yeah, so I played that piece while I was doing my doctorate and I played that a little bit during that time period. But when I was coming up with the album, I thought, oh my gosh, I should play Convergence for that. I love that piece, and it's kind of creepy, and it's it just has this gravitas to it that and I remembered I played it for Rasan, and I was like, "Do you think that you like this would fit?" He's like, "Heidi, that's a showstopper. You should put that in." Like he's like, "You should absolutely put that on the album." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I ended up naming the album after the piece. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, talk to actually two things I want to ask. Fixed media, what does that
Mhm.
mean?
Oh, just the media is pre-recorded. It's like a backing track. So fixed media, you don't have to, it's just it can be on a CD or an MP3 file or something that you just press play and then you play along. So the accompaniment part has already been recorded and is already fixed. And so sometimes when people play with electronics, it can be, you could be using a pedal or you could be playing through a processor system or, pickup mics that are doing it's like kind of live action adjustment of the sound in time. This is just preset. So normally when I play with fixed media, all you need is a couple of speakers and maybe a monitor so you can hear the media coming at you and then you just go. So
Yeah, and I'm just thinking too, yeah, because some of the tracks, where was this? Wind telephone, for example, like so
mhm.
that yeah. So there you have your fixed media, but I'm just also thinking too, I think it's a little bit more stressful. Of course, you have to practice it, often enough, but it's more stressful if it's live action, adding all the sound effects and especially if they're very varied and that kind of thing. Whereas you have the accompaniment set, and you have something that's fixed. It's a little bit easier
It
to manage.
travels well.
Yeah,
I mean, I think every time I've seen there's always the nightmares of you have a piece that I'm like, you got greedy with your electronics, and you travel. It's one thing if you can set that up in your own space and you know how all the equipment works, but if you have to go to a different location and hope that all the equipment is hooked up correctly and the speakers work and the mics work and yeah, that's like the greatest thing about fixed media is normally I can just like run it off my iPad. I'm like, oh, do you have an aux cable? Great, we're good to go. It's like all you need. So, and I like worst case scenario, I just bring like a Bluetooth speaker and like you make it go. So it's like there's a bit of safety in that. It travels well.
yeah, safety is a good word because again, you never know what can happen. You know,
Right.
even people doing popular music and stuff like that. How many times do cables break and
Right.
all that type of thing? All right, cool. So we answered the fixed media thing, but you called the album Convergence, but there is a main theme to this album. Do you want to talk about that
Um,
with the different composers' voices and stuff like that?
yeah, I think, yeah, and I think that sort of ties back to the myriad of traditions that I'm influenced by. Um, and so there is it I have a hard time just when people ask me like, well, what genre is your album? Because
Interesting.
it's just saxophone music. Like I
Yeah.
wish we could like just create like that kind of term. Um, because you have Jenny Watson's arabesque that was influenced by Debussy. It's her take on Debussy's arabesque, arranged for saxophone. So, you know, something that's impressionistic and French sounding, and then something super contemporary like Andy Scott's Westland that's tenor sax and sort of very free um with both sort of I don't know, arpeggiated lines and sequences, but also like, some funky multiphonics. And um yeah, so and then, to Rahsaan Barber's piece that was, on his album Mosaic, a piece originally performed by a jazz quintet, but then, reformatted for me to do with fixed media. So it's just there's some ambient kind of style tracks. There's more of classical minded tracks. There's improvisatory tracks, and just yeah, and experiment sound. So, but I try to keep this sense of singing or grooving alive in the album. So like for me, every track had to either be really lyrical or just really groovy. Um, and so I have to have that point of something that I'm either dancing or singing. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm smiling because that's what I was doing. So I'm listening to this and I'm grooving out, on some of these tracks, and then I'm like, wow, that's really really cool. There's really pretty sounds and all that kind of stuff. That's awesome. Yeah, that's and the hard thing too. I forgot the artist that said this, but it's it's very constraining to have to label yourself in terms of genre, and the reason why that happened because record stores need to know where to put the album,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that was the whole thing.
It's a record store problem. It's a radio station problem. I don't think that artists I think that's an unfair question to ask artists, especially now because we're influenced by so much. I mean,
Yeah,
we have access to so much music. Um, gone are the days where you just learn the music that's sung in your community. We are exposed to so much, and to not have that influence in your playing is not realistic. So yeah, and luckily for a lot of us artists, we're independent, and so we're not like having to satisfy a label's intention for a release.
yeah,
If a label comes at you and they are trying to target a specific market, then they're going to categorize you in a certain way, or they're going to really dictate what songs are included on your album. But for the rest of us, we can put together something like Convergence, which you know I remember when I was talking to the people at Parma, and we were just talking about, well, how would you like to spread the word? And it's like, well, this track can maybe go to this radio station, and this track can go to, like, so, I might be sending some stuff to like a jazz channel, and other stuff to a classical, because there's so many different types of tracks on the album that, you know, and you look at Spotify and what they do with playlists and curated playlists. And so I'm in all sorts of different ones. That album is showing up one song is on this like feminism and music playlist, and the other one is, so which is awesome, by the way. I'm really, I it's great to kind of come out an album come out in March and April, because I was able to hit up some of those themed playlists with the composers that I was playing, and also like the style of music that I was working with. So yeah, I think so. Yeah, the idea of wanting to call it Convergence, I just feel such an affinity for Song Me and for that specific piece. But also I was like, it just really kind of feels like what happened for me to create this album. It was really just a coming together of music that I loved and influences that I had, and yeah, so.
and just like as a mini recap for right now, just from the very beginning when I asked you like what were the things that you listened to that had a strong effect on you, right? And then we had Donald Cinta, and then we had John Coltrane, right? And just from there, and a question I had for you, can you imagine yourself at 11 years old and you had access to what we have right now musically? Can you picture how that would have affected you, and if anything would have changed in terms of your direction of playing?
Oof. Well, that's a loaded question
You're
because,
welcome.
yeah, no, that's, what's interesting about that is I feel I'm actually glad I had kind of the sonic, because I listened to albums.
Okay.
I listened to the record collection that my parents had. We had vinyl, and then, and so to digest media, I went to the library and I checked out albums and I listened to them, and then I, copied them on tape because that's what we all did.
Yep.
Um, and and walked around with my Walkman. And yeah, so until it ate it. So that was always the problem. Um, but but I think now things are in these digestible little bites. So like you get, a 20-second blurb of like a hot lick here, or, saxophone here. I mean, I think you're exposed to a lot, but I don't know how much is absorbed, because I mean, I like I was saying, I listened to Blue Train over and over, and not just a lick off of Blue Train, and not just one track, but the entire album. And then I had to listen to it. I mean, unless I was like rewinding it to start at a certain point, you sort of had to commit to listening through the album all the way.
Yes.
And because of the type of media that I interacted with. So I think it's great, because if you hear something and you're like, oh man, Fela Kuti is awesome, and then you can Google it, and then you can check out, all this music. But the risk is that you sample, a few minutes here, a few minutes there, but you don't listen to like a full album, or um and really immerse yourself, like we did when we invested in buying an album, or bringing something home, or going to the library, and you brought it home and you listened to the whole thing. um
Yeah.
so yeah, we have so much at our fingertips, and I think that's great to see what the instrument can do. I just want people to take the time and really um check it out. Yeah,
It's
check the
the
whole
word
thing
that's
out.
screaming in my head right now is context.
Yeah.
It's almost like you take a book and you have a whole bunch of books. Oh, I'll just read a chapter from here, a chapter from there, a chapter from there, but
Yeah.
that's not going to really give you any kind of understanding of what's going on.
Right.
And yeah, and now I'm curious about this too then. So you're saying like you were grateful you grew up in the time that you did, where it wasn't so overwhelming. We didn't have satellite radio or,
Yeah.
Spotify or Pandora or anything. Like we didn't have YouTube either. In
We
fact,
didn't even have cable. Yeah.
yeah, and actually I just read the other day that YouTube in 2005, the first video was uploaded a couple of days ago at the time of this recording, in April. But um do you notice then with your students the what we're talking about now in terms of like maybe not having that context, maybe not, you know, how do I want to word this? Where everything is all sampled and stuff like that, and it's almost scattered and there's a lack of focus. Do you notice that or no?
It takes a little, I think it takes good guidance. Sometimes I try to steer the students in a direction, like creating a list of players to check out. Um, and and that's really helpful. I challenged my students this semester to come to their lessons every week and tell me a different saxophonist that they listen to,
Awesome.
and what song, because that you always come back in and they're working on a piece of music. I'm like, well, who are you listening to? And it's always, well, that song on YouTube, or like that artist on, and they couldn't tell me who the artist was. Um and so I'm like, okay, well, it could be the best recording ever, or not, and so like and also, if you're going to listen, geek out. I want you to geek out about who you're listening to, and really get to know artist. Did you like the recording? Was it good? Like, if so, who was this artist? Who are you listening to? What else have they recorded? So instead of continuously asking those questions, then I just created a list of contemporary saxophonists of various genres. And then says everything's on the table. You don't have to listen to classical. You don't have to you can listen to any saxophonist. But I want you to tell me who that artist is, and I want you to tell me what you listened to and what you liked about it.
That's cool.
Like, what are the strengths? What did you find? What stood out to you? So that like you start to identify as a student, like, what do you like? What are the sounds you like? What about that artist made you curious? So then it's at challenging my students. not just to listen, but to listen with intention and to look for things in somebody's playing that they either have questions about or they want to incorporate into their own style. So that's useful. So it's great that they have access. They can just look up a name and go to that person's website or find a YouTube video or something like that. But then it's the hard part is to go that extra step. And to, if it's an artist that they like, then to listen to more of that artist. Did they have an album? Did you listen to that full album? What pieces did they play? Did you like any of those pieces? It's like the constant questions because, when I was an undergrad, if I wanted to listen to a piece of music, I had to go to the library. I had to check out an album. I had to check out a listening carol, and go up. And if it was vinyl, I had to listen to the vinyl. And I'd end up, if I took that much effort, I wasn't going to just listen to one song. I was just going to go up and listen to the album. And I think that what that was is I got to know players. I got to know saxophonists. And I was introduced to a lot more repertoire that way because I was listening to, everything that was on albums. So that's kind of the downside of all the media is I feel like people are hearing kind of the hot and now pieces, but maybe not, like the history of the repertoire. There's a lot of hits and misses along the way, but it's great to hear how our instrument has evolved and the different artists from different countries, from different backgrounds, and what voice they bring to what players sound like now. Yeah.
There's so much it was such a great answer, and there's so much in relation to jazz too, in terms of listening and stuff like that, because when you were taking the effort, because it was an effort, first you had to hope that the library had the had the album in the first place,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that it wasn't scratched. But you're investing this effort and this time, and you're also, when you listen to more of one person, you're listening on a deeper level to the nuances. How are they articulating? What is their vibrato like? What are their attacks and releases like? How are they shaping lines? Same thing with jazz, and so it's giving, like, I'll call it context again, giving that context to the listening. And in a world where everything is right at your fingertips, I can't even imagine what's going to happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how it's going to just be even more instantaneous, how we get information and stuff like that. I can't even imagine it, because it's crazy now, right? How quickly you can get things. But I think it's a great lesson to teach students, to put a little bit more effort in, because the rewards are going to be so much more when you listen to more of one particular person, because then you have a point of reference to compare them to somebody else, and then
Right.
another person, and you learn from a lot of times you learn from what you don't like. That's what you learn what you like.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. And if and the challenge too with just listening to like one video by somebody, um you're hearing a piece, and it might not be, is it the saxophonist, is it the piece, it's hard to make all those judgments on a 20-second video clip that you're
Okay.
hearing.
Yeah.
um what is, in any artist, like what are they, is this an artist that I could go to a concert and go to a recital and stay engaged with, and like and dive in? Do I want to go hear this person live, and yeah, I hopefully that's still an effort that everyone wants to make, is just go experience music live.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was just going to ask that too. As you were talking about this, you know, there's obviously there are, or there seem to be more opportunities for people to listen to jazz artists. However, if
Mhm.
you live in a college town, you have a wealth of concerts you can attend at the colleges and stuff. And I'm just thinking though, for people that are in areas where, you know, um, they don't have access to that, it makes it that much harder.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's where people like I've had Chica Inouye on the podcast, and I've seen her at the NAM show a few times, and her and a few other people were speaking about different ways that artists that are playing classical music, especially that they're finding different opportunities for performing than the typical concert hall and stuff. And I'm not sure if you've
Sure.
experienced that or you reached out. I know you teach all the time, but I don't know if that's been a thought for you.
Yeah. Like in terms of just like different community centers or like spot like non-traditional settings or
Yeah, both. Actually, all the
yeah.
above. Like playing in
Yeah.
libraries, playing in
Mhm.
yeah, community centers, playing in parks. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. I did I was living in Indianapolis. I took part in Classical Music Indie, which is an organization that just would do pop-up concerts. And so I would sign up to do a morning, like it might be a Saturday morning, and I would do like mini recitals in various locations around the city. And so I think one time I was playing in just a neighborhood, kind of on a street corner, just like playing saxophone, people going by. And then later that day, I went to a grocery store and I was playing outside the grocery store. Um, and this is and that was actually one of the coolest ones. We went to this neighborhood where a part of the city where live musicians and professional musicians weren't typically making appearances. Um, so it's an access issue, so it was just like kind of going into communities that don't typically have access to classical music or to professional, just any professional musician coming their way, and obviously playing, going to a space where they would be, going to them, and that was the performance that I was like, okay, well, that's an odd one and we'll see how that goes. And it turned out to be one of the most um meaningful performances I think I've ever done, because I was standing out of this grocery store and people were calling family members or calling friends, like, you need to bring your kids out, to the store. There's a saxophonist playing and she's just doing the stuff. And I had this crowd, and there were so many young kids at this, and they were just, and it reminded me of the look I had on my face when I saw that busker in
yep.
Chicago. And I was like, these kids were just looking in awe at the saxophone, which is like, so it's such a full circle moment. Because I'm like,
Yes.
if I created that spark in any of these kids, because this instrument has brought so much meaning and joy to my life. Um, if any of these kids are like, I want to play the saxophone, like, how cool is that? That I had that impact. So um, those those sort of situations, cities that invest in the arts in that way and have programs that just support artists going out into the community in various locations and just like bringing art to public spaces is one of the greatest things and greatest ideas, because it just brings beauty everywhere. It's really great. So
Yeah,
um
that I was gonna say you beat me to it. I was thinking in my head, she became the busker. She became the busker that she saw
uh-huh.
when she was 5 years
Yeah.
old, and
Yep.
that is so totally cool and so totally full circle, and just the impact of that. And what classical music indie? That's an
Mhm.
awesome idea. And it's just is it just in one area or is this nationwide, this organization?
Oh, well, that's I think there might be like classical music, whatever, blank city. I think I yeah, I I don't have the appropriate answer there, but I know there is sort of a networking organization that kind of partnered. I don't know if you've heard of Classical Revolution. And that's sort of a nationwide sort of organization. So Classical Revolution will bring like venues that normally have like rock or jazz or places like that, they'll have a classical revolution night where they bring classical musicians in to play. Um, and so those two organizations sort of kind of partnered, and Classical Music Indie has like a podcast and a radio show, and then they were a non-for-profit organization that had grant funding to pay for artists to make music and do projects. I think it funded, a composer wrote a piece. There's this beautiful public park with like formal gardens and stuff in an area of Indianapolis. It's called Garfield Park. And they commissioned a composer to write a piece that had several movements, inspired by the park. And then we then filmed the recording in various parts of the park. And then they had QR codes like set up in the park so that you could go around and you could listen to the music associated with the park while you were walking through, and you could see like the video. And so it's like those kinds of initiatives that are like employing composers and employing musicians, but then bringing that music to reflect the city and the culture of the city. And so that's just like one example of sort of projects that organization did.
That's brilliant. And it reminds me, I did a podcast episode with Victor Goines, and he composed the music. This was a project for Woodlawn Cemetery, where many, many famous jazz musicians are buried in New York City. And so he composed, all of these pieces, and they created a CD, and like all the big name, so many of the big name jazz players are on this CD. It's an incredible CD, and each piece reflected one of the people that were buried in Woodlawn Cemetery, and you felt their essence and their personality. That's how good his composition skills obviously are.
Right.
But it's the same kind of idea, which I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I just think about like the impact that this can keep having if more organizations maybe get some private funding or something like that, that can spur more interest, whether it's saxophone or other instruments. The more
Mm-hmm.
kids that are playing instruments, I think it's good for society. It's good for humanity.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, just my favorite lessons that I teach are beginner, like the first lesson. That's my favorite lesson. So when I have, a fifth grader, come in and the saxophone's still like in the wrapper, it's like they are overwhelmed. They like don't know what to do, and we put the case on the ground, and we talk about the different parts, and we start putting like together bit by bit, and like making a sound on the mouthpiece and neck, and the eyes just get so big. I mean, the excitement, it's my favorite thing because and everything is awesome, when you're first starting, when you're young and you're fearless, which is like the coolest thing, is kids are absolutely fearless. They do not care if it's a good sound or a bad. If it's a sound, they're all in. And I love that energy. And then to put the saxophone together and have them blow a couple of notes on it, that excitement, that is, I mean, I will never get tired of that. That's just my favorite thing. It just makes me so happy. They're so happy. Um, and I haven't met a kid that's come into a lesson that has not enjoyed that. So it just brings joy. And it's a challenge, and it can be fun and silly, or and it might be something that someone just tries for a little bit and then appreciates for a long time, even if they don't stick with it. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I can see someone just thinking as you're saying this, someone writing a piece of music that would reflect that first lesson. You know what I mean? Like the excitement, the joy, then the sounds, like create some fixed media sound types of things that would happen.
Oh,
First
see,
lesson.
now it's Donna, it's gonna happen. See,
Okay,
you've just planted the seed. There's a composer that's like, check, it's gonna happen. Yeah.
awesome. It's called First Lesson. That's good. It's gonna be called. Adventures of the First Lesson. Something
Yes.
along those lines. This is awesome. Oh my God. Okay, so we diverge, but it's all good. I wanna converge. I want to go back to convergence for a second because and we were joking about this before we went live here, so to speak. And you had I love the way you said this. You called this yes, some the especially the piece Cuckoo. There's a lot of multiphonics on it, and you called it extended techniques bingo. So let's so yeah, let's talk about, yeah, there's a lot of extended techniques on this album and how when did you first start learning how to do extended techniques? And then we're going to get into some of the ones that are in the album and maybe some tips you could share.
Um, yeah, I think like extended techniques in terms of uh like slap tonguing and growling and those sort of things really started in undergrad. I was lucky to go to a school like at Illinois. There were incredible older students that were older than me. We had master students and doctoral students, and they were just playing, repertoire that was just like insane in my mind. And so I heard um, people slap tonguing, and I had to figure it out. And that was not something, and that's probably one of the toughest to teach is how to do some of these extended techniques. Um, and I honestly just listened a bunch and then had to go. I remember going home for spring break once and I was in my parents' basement and I just was like, I'm not coming back up until I figure this out. And so I just sat there and tried to figure out how to slap tongue, based on like, well, what does it sound like? And, what sound am I going for? And I think that kind of comes back to, being a listener and using your ear to sort of go for these extended techniques, and also the awareness training that I had as a developing saxophonist. So kind of going back to this idea about voicing, um, one of the things that did teach me is just awareness over like the whole component of playing, the throat position, the tongue position, my embouchure, how I'm using my air direction, air speed, like all those things to um, work on isolating different parts of the saxophone. And that is honestly at the core of almost every extended technique is just isolating a specific point of the saxophone. And if you think about slap tonguing, we're isolating the point when the reed releases from the mouthpiece. And so, isolating that specific part and knowing like what's not involved in that. Air isn't involved in that. And like so like there's different things that you can kind of eliminate and isolate. And so um I think I think it was that awareness that allowed me to explore working on multiphonics and working on these different. I'm trying to think of like in Cuckoo, the big extended techniques. There's circular breathing. There's definitely a lot of slap tongue, and there's multiphonics. And I think those are like the main thing that you're going to hear in that one. Um, and so learning how to do those things with multiphonics, it's really just exactly what how do I find and balance these multiple pitches all at the same time? Can I isolate each one? And so you just kind of you find the fingering, or you go with the fingering that's suggested, and then you just do voicing exercises through those. So
Okay.
like if there's a multiphonic that's like three different pitches that the composer wants you to play at the same time, then they'll normally provide you with a fingering for that, because there's books. So you can look at the Jean-Marie Landex has the Hello Mr. Sax, which is a great resource for a ton of different multiphonics. So composers will normally not go rogue and just expect you to come up with your own fingering choice to create these multiphonics. But so there's resources that you can use, but then to find them, you have to figure out, can I use this fingering, and then can I isolate each pitch in this multiphonic? Can I find each one individually? And so that's when I'm using, like, if I was to sing that pitch, where would my throat be? How would I sing that particular pitch in that register? And like I find that on the saxophone, I map that onto the saxophone, and then find the next one. And then if I can go between those two, then I need to find a neutral place that allows all of them to speak at the same time, which takes a little time. So like for every multiphonic that you work on, and there's multiphonics in Andy Scott's Westland, there's, so several of the pieces have those, and you have to live with them for a little bit. You have to figure out where those need to be placed physically, so that I basically, what I'm thinking is where do I need to sing? And I always like come back to my voice, like, where do I need to sing this pitch so that it works the way I want it to? And so that's really where that kind of came from. And then the circular breathing was just pure stubborn will on my part. I think I just had been told about, practicing with a cup and straw, where you like blow bubbles into water through a straw, and then you try to take little sips of air through your nose as you're doing it. And like that kind of works, but it was honestly just trying to do like little things. Like I would just try to keep trilling a note or something simple, where I wasn't having to think about my fingers. And then puffing my cheeks full of air and then pushing that through while trying to take tiny, tiny little sips with my nose and just keep the trill alive. So instead of blowing bubbles, I would do it with like a trill or something in the middle of the horn, until I learned to do that. That was like the easiest way for me to just sort of get the concept onto the saxophone. And then as I got more and more comfortable, I would just try to practice that with like maybe a chromatic scale, or and then I would find that there's certain parts of the horn that are way easier to take a circular breathing breath than others. Like if you try to do it in the extreme registers, it's a lot harder because your air has to be working differently in like the palm keys than it does in the middle of the register. So so you kind of learn like, well, I have to plan those, like where I take a circular breath. If I try to do that on a high F sharp, I'm not going to have much success, because there's no way that you can puff your air into the horn that fast to sustain the pitch. So you have to do it on notes that don't need as fast of an air to maintain the resonance. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would make sense too, because again, with your embouchure and stuff like that, then
Yeah.
you need a certain amount of tension, so to speak. I
Right.
don't mean unnecessary tension, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
cool. Oh my gosh. This is great. This is like a lesson, mini lessons on each thing over here. And yeah, and you said the magic word. It was two magic words, a stubborn persistence, because these things are not easy to get, on the first try, second, third, fourth, or 10th.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. I think I don't know. I like things like that to me are puzzles. And I treat them like I just have extreme curiosity about it. And so I think that allowed me to work on certain things and extended techniques without getting extremely frustrated, because I was just really curious. And so, you kind of have to channel that fifth grader that's unafraid of making bad sounds, because you're going to make bad sounds. But the curiosity part, and where that comes into play, I think, is making a sound and understanding, why did I make that sound, regardless of what's intended or what's not intended. Whatever sound happens, what did I just do to create it? Sometimes students working on altissimo or the upper register, they get a higher note, and I'm like, that's not a squeak. Let's figure out what pitch. You just got an altissimo D. And I changed that from being a squeak to being a different altissimo note. And I'm like, what were you doing to do? Can you get that note again? Can you repeat that same sound? Let's figure out, how does that feel? What are you feeling? Where is your tongue placement? Like, it's all comes into awareness. No matter what sound you make, it's valid. It's a valid sound, and it's one that you want to be able to do on command. Whether so the experimentation and learning how to do a different technique is really just about understanding why we make the sounds we do and what goes into them. um, and you conquer one, then you can either choose to not make that same sound or do it again, or play on that, and like, okay, well, what if you make that same sound and then you do a bend on it? Or like, what if we do that and then, so little small tweaks, how does that change the sound? Yeah.
Yeah, what I love that you said, awareness, and it's so interesting because when you teach a lot of students, some students are totally unaware of what they're doing, and then like I'll often say, okay, so what did you do to create that kind of effect? Oh, I don't know. And it's try, and the thing is that playing an instrument, we're all different. We all have different mouths, teeth, shapes, all these different types of things. And what may work for me will not exactly work for somebody else. So you have to be curious,
Yes.
you have to be persistent, and you have to take the concept, but more importantly, you have to be aware of what's going on and what you're doing, so that when you make what, you may think is a mistake, it may not be, but when that happens, why did that happen? I think that that's great. Awareness is the key.
Hmm. I mean, athletes do this all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we relate this. And so, if you're swimming, you're on a swim team, you're going to spend a lot of time. Well, how do you get better at a stroke? You are thinking about, how your arms are moving, and then what your hand position is, and like, the tension that you're holding in your muscles. And so you're in the same thing with running, any sport. I mean, when you go to practice, and I ask students this, like, do you work on, when you're hitting a tennis ball, are you thinking about how you're swinging the racket and the position of your hand, and like, like all those things? And every time, well, of course, of course we think about that. And so practicing a musical instrument isn't just about pushing the right buttons down at the right time and playing the right note lengths, but it's the physicality of interacting with this instrument, and how your body is physically moving, and handling. So like that aspect of it, um, and I have to do a shout out to Otis Murphy, because working with him, um, he's such a master of awareness of like handling the saxophone. And so his lessons brought even more attention of just really thinking critically about how I was interacting with the instrument. And that was really cool. Of just, I was already doing some things like pretty well. Point was my doctorate, so like I had a bit of a clue going in there, but just the questions that he would ask really made me stop and think. And then when you start teaching students, you have to really think about, um, what is it that I'm doing? When a student asks you a question, well, how did you make the notes sound that way? You have to think about that. And um, and that's not just a secret for teachers, that or professionals. That should be a skill set that, from an early age, we encourage our students to just build awareness over how they're handling the instrument and how they're using their bodies, to do that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
actually, I'm going to say it's not even just the young kids will especially benefit, but also anybody just taking up saxophone at any age,
Yes, of
because
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
because the thing is that and I just want to get clarification too. So Otis Murphy, was he dealing with Alexander type technique things with you, or are you talking something else?
Oh, just plain saxophone technique.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about it, how you interact with, hand position, and embouchure, and just really just a deep awareness of the saxophone as a machine and your handling of it. So to me, it felt very, very much like uh like athletic training in that way of um being a lot more aware of how much tension I had in my body when I played. So, I mean, some of that could be considered Alexander Tech. Certainly was like he would bring people in and it was encouraged. But like, I think just awareness, if you're playing with their right shoulder, like totally hiked up to your earlobe, um, that's going to inhibit how your hands work.
Yeah, I agree.
It's going to inhibit how you breathe.
Yeah.
And so if you're struggling with making phrases, but you have a whole bunch of tension in your shoulder, well, there's a reason because the air and the oxygen in your body is concentrating on the tension, and you're losing it from where it could go. So this idea of just how are we physically approaching the horn? It goes a long way, and it all ties together with how well you play. I mean, I'm a small person, and so if I want to play that tenor saxophone and play, a concerto that's over a band, I have to know how to project. I have to utilize. I have to be very strategic in how I approach the instrument to get the most out of it. I can't waste air. I can't waste energy in a certain way. And I have to be hypercritical about, how I'm focusing the air into the horn to get the resonance, to get the tone, to manipulate the pitch, like all those things. Like it takes it you have to be on, to get those kind of results. So
Do you have any, this is really great. Do you have any tips with regard to, uh, breathing, especially when you're playing the larger instruments like the tenor and the bari and
mhm.
stuff? And you're talking about focusing the air, but do you have any tips that you can share for people that are smaller, but or really for anybody, I would say?
Um, well, one of the most common things that I see that impacts, because people breathe and take deep breaths. And so I see this a lot where like I'm playing along with a student and they're taking in just as much air as I am. They're taking a really deep breath, but they are not making it anywhere close to the length of phrase I'm making. Um, and so there's a couple of things. One is the manner in which you take a breath. I always recommend when you breathe. This just comes back to some saxophone fundamentals, but keep your top teeth anchored on the mouthpiece. I always call it like a Muppet breath when you like flip your head back to take a breath and you take your top teeth off the mouthpiece. So like Muppets breathe with their heads tilted back. So I'm like, you're taking a Muppet breath. Like what that does is it wastes time when you have to re-engage and start a note. So you're losing air in just the refocusing of your embouchure. It's a lot faster if you take a breath below the reed, and keep your top teeth anchored so that you can just and go. All right. So we're not wasting air in the intermediaries. So there's like that's an efficiency issue. And the other issue is it's taking in air, but it's awareness in how you release that air.
How you release the
So
air. Okay.
how you release the air into the horn. Um, so if I take a deep breath, but then I am not focusing the air in a certain way, we can lose a lot of air. It can either go into the cheeks, it can get it can we can create a leak in our embouchure, or we're doing things in a way that if your tongue position, say you're taking air but your tongue is really like wide in your mouth, um then we're kind of throwing kind of hot air like right at the front of the mouthpiece, and there's just a backlog, right? So there's just a ton of air there, but it's not being efficiently used. Whereas if you think of funneling your air to the mouthpiece, it's almost like I can hiss a lot longer than I can whistle.
Hmm.
So if I go and make a hissing sound, I can do that a lot longer than I can just whistle a note out. So
I'm gonna try
Like,
that out.
yeah, it's like it lasts a lot longer, because that's how much more focused the airstream is.
Hmm.
So the more that you can focus the airstream and think about really channeling it to the tip of the mouthpiece, depending on the ask of the piece or like the dynamic or what I'm trying to go for, or the sound color that I'm trying to go for. But if I can work on focusing that air, I can make it a lot longer, on one breath, and I can use the air that I take in and use it and get a lot more out of it than I would if I was just kind of blowing a wall of air at my saxophone.
That's a
Yeah.
phenomenal tip. And I think that's no, seriously, that is because that's and that goes with Donald Sinta's teachings. Um,
Yeah.
I would think it tremendously. I think that's such a great tip. And I'm thinking what other people listening to the podcast are going to ask, and they're going to say, well, you know what? All right, I hear you, but doesn't your equipment have a big role in, in everything that you're doing? So like,
Oh,
how would you,
sure.
yeah, how would you respond, when it comes to that?
Um, uh, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I think, um, and then that comes down to the ask of the music, and I think, if I'm playing on a link, I'm not going to get the same, like it's going to have a completely different resistance than if I'm playing on my Van Doren T20, um, which is more classical setup. The focus of that's a completely different animal. But at the same time, uh, I'm not trying to get the same things out of both of those pieces of equipment. I so that's like the music that I'm playing is going to breathe in a different way. Um, and I think that's important. So I think the manner in which we breathe, I'm still going to be taking that air in the same way, and I'm still going to be thinking about how I'm releasing that air forward, because I always tell my students, if you could take in a big breath of air and then you can say the alphabet without deflating.
Wow.
So it's just like really taking in a whole bunch of air and then not letting yourself deflate. You're really controlling the release of that air, and then you're building a more of an awareness of how fast you're releasing air. And I think you can play around with any setup and kind of find your limits of like how long can I sustain a tone, and can I sustain a tone longer if I'm playing quieter or louder, or like what are the limits here? What does this equipment allow me to do, and what is it requiring my body to do, um, to get all the extremes. And so, yeah, there's different tools for different jobs, that's for sure. And so, yeah, there's no expectation that I would be able to do the same thing on one setup versus the other.
Sure. No, absolutely. And since we're mentioning it too, people are going to be curious, so like for example, let's say your classical, let's talk about your setups, so like what are your setups for soprano, classical, alto classical, tenor classical?
I use a lot of Van Doren. I do a mix from time to time. Like I really love the new Van Doren profile mouthpieces actually for soprano and alto. Um, I play those a lot. I also have my Larry Teal on alto. I play a vintage Larry Teal, and it's still like um, it's beloved. Like I love that mouthpiece. I like I always say like that's like if I had to go into high risk surgery with a mouthpiece, that's the one I'm going to take, because I know how it works because I've been playing it so long, and I know exactly what I can do with that mouthpiece. So if it's like critical situation of music making, that's like my go-to because it's my most trusted companion. But and on tenor, I play a Van Doren T20. That's my classical setup on that one, and honestly, like those are primarily what I play. Um,
And
and then
soprano also?
soprano, I play that Van Doren profile. Yeah, I
Okay,
love
got
that
it.
one. Yeah. Hmm. So That's been a fun one. Before they came out with that, I think I played an S15 for a while, and I had a S90 170 actually too. So a couple Selmer pieces, a couple of Van Doren pieces, um, that I kind of messed around with. But I like the ease of the profile. It's a good fit for soprano. So,
Awesome,
or
cool.
my soprano, which is just a crazy horn. So yeah,
Well, you have the Selma Supreme, alto and I think tenor, right?
I do. I went, yes. I always tell people like I sold a house. I sold a house and I bought two saxophones. So
Yes.
yeah, it was I didn't want to do it. I was very reluctant and then I played them and I was like, "Oh man. Yeah, I have to go that route." The sound was just too much. I had to say yes to that one. And then my soprano is just it's a sterling silver Selmer series 3 soprano. So it's just a silver beast of a horn. So I have to temper that with a little bit more of a reserved mouthpiece. Otherwise, I think the sound would be like, even on the recording, it was actually funny because I recorded the album in Meeser Auditorium, which is a performance hall. And so I just recorded it in a concert hall, all the tracks, and then I listened to the fixed media in headphones, and then we mixed that after. Um, but for Cuckoo, which is the only soprano piece on that album, that horn resonated so much in the auditorium. There is like no reverb on that. Like we didn't take any, like I had to turn off all the hall. Like we just have the stage mic on that thing, and you still hear so like more reverb than any other piece. And it's just the horn bouncing off the walls. Like that instrument. It's funny because I asked the recording engineer, I'm like, did you do something weird with that track? He's like, no. He's like, that's just you. Like you did that. So
Wow.
yeah.
Were those one take tracks?
Like did I play no well, so the recording process is a mysterious mistress here. But not too many. I mean, I think every song there's multiple takes and there's some editing here and there, but yeah. So of course.
Yeah, because you perform most of them in a concert, in a
Yeah.
recital. So that's why I'm just asking that.
Yeah, but like Cuckoo, like that one, there's probably just a couple edit points because like a lot of that's just circular breathing. And so like I just wanted to be honest. Like I had to do. So I think and there's actually there's a part of that piece it's not perfect. Um and and I think that's the thing when you kind of get into a studio album and there's this quest for making everything sound perfect.
Yeah.
Um but it was just I listened to this one take and I was like, well, like it's not completely right, but I think it's really awesome. Like I like played like a different, I think I played like a little variation and the chord progression wasn't quite right, but I like dug the vibe so much that I'm like, well, I'm using it. Like,
Cool.
sorry, yeah, like yeah. So that happened. And there's a big part that I just wanted it to be me. And like there's and I had 3 days in the hall to do 9 pieces.
Yeah.
So um I think that's how many there are, maybe 8. I don't remember. And so I had 4 hours each day. So I had 12 hours of recording time to get this done. So like there was kind of limited, like I had to go in prepared and I had to play it.
Yeah, and it's not totally 12 hours either because when you get there, again, things had to be set
Of
up.
course, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sound check and like make sure the mics are in the right spot, all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, thankfully you're using fixed media and not having to worry about other setups and stuff like that because that would
Exactly.
that would take up a
Yeah.
lot of time for sure. Uh, No, but this is really so interesting. So let me ask, so we have the classical setup on the album. Was this the setup that you used on all these instruments, these mouthpieces and stuff, or did you use any other setup for some of these pieces? Because, again, with these extended techniques and all that type of thing, I was just wondering if you'd use something different.
Yep, this is just my setups. Yep,
That's
absolutely.
awesome. That's
Yep.
awesome. And how can people find the album? We're going to put a link in the show notes, but how can people find the album to buy it?
Yeah, so it's through Navona Records, and so you can search the title and go to the album page on Navona, but it's also available on Amazon Music. It's available on Music as well. So if you wanted to purchase the album that way, it's like on all pretty much all the streaming platforms. So
Cool.
it's yeah, it was produced digital. It's a digital object. So as they do these days. So that's how it is available, is just digital download.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the cost, people don't realize the cost for producing physical CDs is just astronomical.
It is, yeah. But you could do it the old-fashioned way, if you still have a burner, and then you could download my album and put it on a CD, like,
Yeah.
or and then put it on a tape, and then you can, do it that way. So we're just gonna retrofit it.
For
Yeah,
Walkmans.
for Walkmans. There's gonna, yeah. Just wait. Everything comes back. It'll come back. Yeah.
Well, bell bottoms came back, so I mean,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
that one I don't know why, but no, anyways, it's well, let me ask you this question. How can people find you online?
Um, yeah, I have my own website, Heidi Radtke .com. So you can just do that. And I'm also you can find me through the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, on their faculty page. So reaching out that way is a good way. But yeah, you can reach out to me directly through my website. I have contact information up there. And or
Social
yeah, through
media?
UNC. Social media, yes, I'm on the Facebook and on the Instagram. So
Got it. And do you
yeah,
have a YouTube channel also?
I do have a YouTube channel. Yes.
Okay,
I
good.
just remembered that.
Good to hear that.
I'm like so bad with the social media. Yeah, I'm trying to beef up my game. Like I have an album out I should try. But yeah, I've been so reclusive, I think, up into this point, and just yeah. I'm still like reminiscing about, burning things off of the radio. So
I
yeah.
was just about to say that, just old school,
My
yeah,
mixtapes, yeah.
mixed.
That always has like a bit of the DJ like on it, because you're like they're gonna play the song you wanted to record, and like you miss like the like either the first couple seconds because you were late to hit record, or you get like some sort of sound bite that you didn't intend. Yeah, those are the best. Yeah.
That's so funny. Well, now let me ask you, I was going to ask this before, any future plans, number one with the album, in terms of possibly doing, pop-up concerts with some of the pieces from the album or other types of ideas or another recital?
Yeah, I'm gonna be teaching at Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp up in Michigan this summer. Um, then and I'll be doing a faculty recital that'll be playing a lot of pieces from that album. That's on July 29th, on the campus of Blue Lake. Um, and that information's on my website too. I have some performances coming up. Um, and then I think I'm planning on doing some like regional recitals and traveling at Duke University and some various areas around North Carolina in the fall to do some master classes and some performances that will feature a lot of the music from the album. So getting a little bit more mileage out of it
Yeah.
at some places. It's just like in my neck of the woods at least. So
Oh, absolutely. No, for sure. And what about like, again, you're teaching all that kind of thing. Any future plans for whether it's a next album or new pieces that you're working on?
yeah. So doing an album, it just like it was such a blast. I totally want to do another one.
Cool.
Um, and I think I'm really leaning heavily towards a lot of tenor music. So
That's cool.
yeah, I just it is my favorite voice for the saxophone. I love playing tenor, and so I'm exploring some repertoire, and I think I would actually love to do some stuff with more collaborative musicians. So I did the fixed media thing, but I would really love to collaborate with more musicians on the next album, and um, either work with some string players or some things like that. So other saxophonists maybe. So we'll see what kind of comes my way, and um, but yeah, look for more tenor music, I think, coming from me. That's
That's
the
cool. Yeah, because
yeah.
obviously there's more alto saxophone, music, and so that would be really great, to give a voice, no pun intended, but to give a voice to the tenor saxophone.
Yeah, I think there's we have the some of the older pieces that I think everyone is kind of aware of, but there's been a lot written for the tenor. Um, and I'm always sort of seeking out the stuff that's not like all extended techniques, but like just music. So again, to me, I'm looking for those pieces that sing and looking for those pieces that groove. And so we'll see what I uncover. But right now I'm in that investigative phase where I'm just like really hunting for repertoire and like composers and collaborative opportunities. But yeah, I'm kind of wanting to work with other people for this next round.
That
Yeah.
is cool. That's awesome. Well, listen, you've been so generous with your time, Heidi. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's great to be a part of it. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's Donna here. I'm back again. And what I wanted to do, since we spoke so much about Heidi's album and especially about the song Cuckoo, I wanted to go to a spot in this particular piece of music that showed some of these extended techniques. This spot really stood out to me. So this is Cuckoo, Kuku, and this is around 3 minutes and 31 seconds in. Check this out. Okay, that was really cool. That was so cool. And you could hear all the extended techniques, the um the slap tonguing, the multiphonics, she said she was circular breathing. But just like she said in this podcast where she wanted this album to have a sense of lyricism, but also a groove. And I'm sitting there, I don't know about you, but man, her sense of timing was really so good, spot on. It kind of is reminiscent of like some of the stuff that Derek Brown does when you think about it, beatbox sax, right? But just to have the technique to be able to do all that, it's just incredible. I'm going to really encourage you. I'm going to put links in the description in the show notes for you to check out her album and buy it because it's really unique and it's exemplary. It's exemplary playing. Definitely check it out. All right, I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. Support the show and share this on all your social media channels. Thanks for listening in.